Vivien Lee truly hated him more than anyone. Vivien Lee was born Vivien Mary Hartley on November 5, 1913 in Darjeeling, British India. From her earliest days, Lee showed a striking mix of beauty, intelligence, and strong determination that would later define her amazing career. She was born to British parents, Ernest Hartley, an officer in the Indian Cavalry, and Gertrude Robinson Yakchi, a woman of Irish and Parsi heritage. Vivien spent her early childhood surrounded by the exotic beauty of colonial India. Her family traveled often and exposed her to different cultures and languages. These experiences would later help her play characters from different worlds with rare emotional truth. When Vivien was 6 years old, her parents brought her to England. They enrolled her at a convent school, where her love of literature and theater began to grow. She was a bright child who recited poems and performed small plays for classmates. She captivated audiences even at that young age. Later, she attended the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, in London. She worked on her craft and developed the refined speech, emotional depth, and expressive range that would become her trademarks. Her beauty was ethereal, her voice melodic, and her poise magnetic. These traits made her stand out in the crowded world of young actresses. Lee's rise to stardom began modestly with small roles in British films during the 1930s, but her breakthrough came when she was cast as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, 1939. The film was one of the most ambitious productions of its time. It required an actress capable of showing both fiery strength and delicate vulnerability. Vivien Lee embodied Scarlett with an intensity that mesmerized audiences worldwide. Her performance earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress and made her an international icon. To this day, her performance remains one of cinema's most unforgettable and frequently imitated performances. Critics and fans alike marveled at how naturally she inhabited the complex Southern belle. Many thought the role was impossible for an English actress to master. Following her triumph in Gone with the Wind, Lee continued to prove that her talents were not limited to one legendary role. She displayed equal brilliance in theater, particularly in Shakespeare productions. Her work with Laurence Olivier, her husband and artistic partner, became legendary in British theater. Together they performed in plays like Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Macbeth. They often drew record-breaking crowds. Their relationship, though deeply passionate, was also stormy. It was marked by the pressures of fame, demanding careers, and Vivien's worsening health. Despite these struggles, the pair remained one of the most celebrated couples in theatrical history. In 1951, Lee delivered another career-defining performance as Blanche DuBois in A Streetcar Named Desire, both on stage and in Elia Kazan's film adaptation. Her portrayal of the fragile, delusional Southern woman haunted by past traumas earned her a second Academy Award for Best Actress. The role's emotional intensity, however, mirrored Vivien's own inner battles. She suffered from bipolar disorder, then called manic depressive illness. This condition brought severe mood swings, emotional turbulence, and periods of exhaustion. Her illness often affected her work and relationships. But despite the challenges, Lee continued to perform with courage and grace. She was determined not to be defined by her struggles. Behind the glamour, Vivien Lee was a woman of great intellect, sensitivity, and resilience. She was known for her careful preparation for roles and her perfectionist nature. She often pushed herself beyond the limits of her health. Friends and colleagues described her as both fragile and fiercely strong. She was an artist driven by a constant need to express beauty and truth through her craft. Her eyes, bright and expressive, could convey layers of emotion that went beyond dialogue. This made her performances deeply affecting and unforgettable. Vivien's later years were marked by declining health, both mental and physical. Despite this, she continued to work on stage and in film. She appeared in productions such as Ship of Fools, 1965, and The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone, 1961. Even as illness took its toll, she never lost her elegance or her devotion to acting. Vivien Lee's romantic life was as captivating and complex as the characters she portrayed on screen. It was marked by two deeply influential marriages that shaped her personal and professional identity. Her first marriage was to Herbert Lee Hallman, a barrister who was nearly 13 years her senior. The couple married in 1932 when Vivien was only 19 years old. At that time she was still known by her birth name Vivien Mary Hartley. Hallman was a man of traditional values who preferred a quiet domestic life. He was initially disapproving of Vivien's growing interest in theater, yet, despite his concerns, he supported her to some extent during the early stages of her acting career. Perhaps he didn't realize how quickly her ambition would push her into the public eye. Their union, though founded on affection, became increasingly strained as Vivien's passion for acting intensified. She began taking drama lessons at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, and her pursuit of a career on stage and screen soon clashed with Holman's conservative expectations of marriage. In 1933, she gave birth to their only child, a daughter named Suzanne Farrington. Suzanne would later become one of the few constants in Vivien's turbulent life. However, by the mid-1930s, the emotional and physical distance between husband and wife had widened. Vivien's rising fame and her immersion in the London theatre scene made it difficult for her to live within the traditional boundaries of marriage that Holman expected. Their marriage eventually ended in divorce in 1940. By that time, Vivien had already fallen deeply in love with another man, the celebrated actor Laurence Olivier. Vivien's second marriage to Laurence Olivier became one of the most legendary and talked about unions in the history of British theatre and cinema. They married in 1940 after years of a passionate and controversial affair that began while they were both married to other people. Their love story started on the set of the play Fire Over England in 1937, where their on-screen chemistry quickly spilled over into real life. At that time, Olivier was married to actress Jill Esmond and Vivien was still tied to Herbert Holman. Yet neither could resist the magnetic pull between them. Their romance became the subject of public fascination and scandal as both stars were admired figures in Britain's artistic elite. When they finally married, they were seen as the royal couple of the theatre world. Two supremely talented, beautiful, and charismatic figures whose combined star power lit up both stage and screen. During their marriage, Lee and Olivier frequently worked together on theatrical productions. These included Shakespeare classics like Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Macbeth. Their performances captivated audiences across Britain and the United States. They also appeared together in films such as That Hamilton Woman, 1941, a wartime epic that mirrored their own stormy passion. Professionally, they were a powerhouse. They inspired each other to achieve artistic greatness. Yet privately, their marriage was filled with turmoil. Vivien's struggle with bipolar disorder and recurring bouts of tuberculosis placed immense strain on their relationship. Olivier, though devoted to her for many years, often found himself overwhelmed by her unpredictable moods and fragile health. The pressures of fame, coupled with Vivien's deteriorating mental stability, eventually eroded the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. By the late 1950s, cracks in their marriage had become impossible to ignore. Vivien's illness led to frequent emotional breakdowns. Olivier began finding comfort in his work and other relationships. Despite their separation, however, there was always a deep undercurrent of affection between them. Even after their divorce in 1960, Olivier continued to express admiration for Vivien's talent and sensitivity. He later called her a true genius, far greater than I could ever hope to be. Vivien too reportedly kept a photograph of Olivier by her bedside until her death in 1967. This suggested that despite all the heartbreak, he remained the great love of her life. When Vivien Lee was cast opposite Rex Harrison in the 1937 romantic comedy Storm in a Teacup, the production team expected sparks of chemistry and sophistication between two of Britain's brightest rising stars. What they got instead was a volatile clash of temperaments that would leave Vivien Lee with a lifelong distaste for Harrison. It was so deep that she later confessed she could not bear even to hear his name spoken. Though the film itself was a modest success, the experience of working with Harrison left a bitter mark on Vivien's memory of her early film career. Rex Harrison was already known in London's West End for his haughty intelligence and sharp wit. He carried himself with an air of superiority that was both admired and despised by his peers. To Vivien Lee, who was still carving her path toward stardom, his arrogance felt unbearable. She reportedly described him as the most conceited man I ever met, adding that he behaved as though he were doing everyone a favor by merely standing in the same room. During filming, Harrison's habit of speaking down to others, particularly his female co-stars, grated on Vivien's nerves. She was fiercely independent and unafraid to challenge men who underestimated her. She refused to be intimidated by Harrison's reputation for intellectual dominance. Their on-screen partnership in Storm in a Teacup was meant to depict a lively romantic tension, a spirited young woman and a pompous town official whose initial rivalry blossoms into love. Off-screen, however, there was no affection to be found. According to crew members, Vivien often emerged from rehearsals red-faced and trembling with frustration. She later recalled, "He was insufferable, smug, vain, and constantly reminding everyone how clever he was. Acting with him was like trying to reason with a brick wall." For someone as emotionally sensitive and perfectionist as Lee, the daily battle to maintain composure around Harrison was exhausting. Part of the conflict came from their opposing artistic temperaments. Vivien was deeply intuitive, driven by feeling and psychological nuance. Rex Harrison approached acting as a precise cerebral craft. He believed in restraint and wit. She believed in passion and truth. Their methods collided in nearly every scene. When Vivien sought emotional spontaneity, Harrison would mock her for being too theatrical. When he delivered his lines with cool detachment, she accused him of thinking too much and feeling nothing. The tension between them became so intense that some scenes had to be filmed separately to avoid on-set arguments. Off the set, Harrison's private behavior did little to redeem him in Vivien's eyes. He was known for his biting sarcasm and his tendency to belittle those he deemed less sophisticated. Lee, who already faced the challenges of being a young actress in a male-dominated industry, found his condescension particularly galling. "He treated me like a schoolgirl who ought to be grateful for his attention," she reportedly said. "But I wasn't grateful. I was furious." Her resentment deepened when she learned that Harrison had made dismissive remarks about her acting abilities to mutual acquaintances. He called her a pretty face with ambitions beyond her talent. The irony, of course, is that within 2 years of their collaboration, Vivien Lee would achieve international fame as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, 1939. She earned an Academy Award and cemented her reputation as one of the greatest actresses of her generation. Harrison, for all his early self-importance, would not reach comparable cinematic success until much later. When Lee heard of his subsequent triumph in My Fair Lady, she reportedly quipped, "Well, at least he finally found a role where cold arrogance was an asset." Vivien's hatred for Rex Harrison endured for decades, surviving long after Storm in a Teacup had faded from public memory. Friends said she would still shudder at the mention of his name. Her bitterness was not merely about one unpleasant experience. It symbolized her intolerance for hypocrisy and vanity. She valued authenticity, emotional honesty, and mutual respect between actors. Harrison, in her view, embodied everything false about the theater world. The ego, the pretense, the cruelty masked as sophistication. "He never acted," she once told a friend. "He just strutted about playing Rex Harrison." Even Laurence Olivier, who knew both Vivien and Rex well, acknowledged that the animosity was unbridgeable. He once tried to persuade Vivien to forgive Harrison's arrogance. He suggested that his manner was simply the armor of a man insecure in his own talent. Vivien, however, refused to soften. "Insecurity is no excuse for cruelty," she snapped. "He enjoyed belittling people. That's not insecurity. That's character." In later years, as Vivien's career was marked by triumphs and tragedy, her recollections of that early collaboration remained vivid. She could speak warmly of other co-stars who challenged her, Clark Gable, Marlon Brando, or even Olivier himself, but never of Rex Harrison. "He was poison," she once said quietly. "Some people drain your energy just by standing beside you. He was one of them." Her words capture not just professional disdain, but something far more personal. The deep emotional aversion of an artist who found herself trapped early in her career beside a man whose arrogance suffocated the joy of creation. Thus, Storm in a Teacup became more than a film credit in Vivien Lee's career. It was a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even the most luminous talents must sometimes shine beside those who seek to dim them. And for Vivien Lee, Rex Harrison would forever stand as the embodiment of that struggle. The man she truly hated more than anyone, Vivien Lee passed away on July 8, 1967, at the age of 53 from tuberculosis, a disease she had battled for years. Her death sent shockwaves through the artistic community and left an irreplaceable void in the world of cinema and theater. Yet her legacy endures. Lee's performances remain timeless, her beauty ageless, and her courage inspiring to generations of actors who followed in her footsteps.